Across Africa, the story is almost always the same. National carriers launch with fanfare, bleed cash for a few years, and quietly collapse into bankruptcy or bailout. And then there's Ethiopian Airlines, which last year posted $7.6 billion in revenue, up 8%, carried 19 million passengers, and just committed $12.5 billion to building a brand new airport in the desert. One survivor on a continent of failures, and it isn't just surviving, it's spending more than its entire annual revenue on a single bet to become Africa's super connector. But the Gulf giants it's trying to dethrone are already moving onto its turf. Ethiopian built an empire on a model nobody else managed to copy, but its home airport is now full. So the question is simple: can $12.5 billion actually make Addis Ababa the Dubai of Africa? Or will the Gulf carriers strangle it before the concrete even sets? Let's start with just how alone Ethiopian really is at the top. By every metric that matters, Ethiopian Airlines is the largest carrier on the continent. Most passengers carried, most destinations served, largest fleet, highest revenue. No African competitor comes close on any single one of those measures, and Ethiopian leads on all of them at once. But size isn't the remarkable part. Plenty of airlines have been big and broke at the same time. The remarkable part is that Ethiopian is one of the very few consistently profitable carriers anywhere on the continent. While the flag carriers around it have been propped up by governments, restructured, or shut down entirely, Ethiopian keeps printing results that would look healthy on any continent. That $7.6 billion in revenue for the 2024-25 financial year wasn't a one-off spike. It was an 8% increase year over year, achieved while adding routes and pulling in 19 million passengers, growth and profit at the same time, in a market that has buried airline after airline. And here's a detail most people miss about who actually owns it. Ethiopian Airlines Group sits wholly inside Ethiopian Investment Holdings, the country's sovereign wealth fund. This isn't a privatized carrier chasing quarterly numbers for outside shareholders. It's a state asset owned by the nation, run like a commercial business. That structure matters, and it's going to matter a great deal more by the end of this story. So you have a single airline standing on a continent littered with the wreckage of its rivals. Largest, most profitable, owned by the state, but disciplined like a private operator. The obvious question is how? How does one carrier win decade after decade where almost every peer dies? The answer isn't some secret subsidy or lucky break. It's a model that was sitting in plain sight, one everyone else looked at and ignored. Look at a map of Africa, and Addis Ababa sits almost dead in the middle of the continent. That's not an accident Ethiopian stumbled into. It's the foundation of the entire business. Ethiopian runs a hub and spoke network that does something deceptively powerful. It pulls passengers out of dozens of smaller African cities that could never on their own justify a direct flight to Asia or Europe or the Americas, and funnels all of them through one central hub in Addis. From there, those passengers connect onto long-haul flights to Asia, to Europe, to North America, to South America. On their own, a few dozen travelers from a mid-sized African city are worth almost nothing to a long-haul airline. Pooled together through a single hub, they fill wide bodies headed across the planet. Geography, weaponized, and the genius is the location. Addis Ababa's central position makes it a natural collection point in a way a hub on the coast or at the edge simply can't match. The math that kills smaller carriers, not enough demand on any single thin route, is exactly the math Ethiopian solved by aggregating everything through the middle, but the passenger network is only half of it. Bolted onto that hub is one of the most underrated cargo operations in world aviation. Through Ethiopian Cargo and Logistics Services, the airline runs one of the largest cargo terminals on the entire continent, plus a new e-commerce logistics facility at its Bowl hub, built for the explosion in cross-border online shipping. The same central geography that makes Addis a great passenger connection makes it a great freight connection too. Belly cargo on passenger jets, dedicated freighters, ground logistics, all feeding the same machine. And it reaches well beyond Africa. In Europe, Ethiopian Cargo operates a hub at Liège Airport in Belgium, a partnership that has now run for more than 17 years. That's not a trial, that's a deeply embedded freight corridor between Africa and the heart of Europe, sustained across nearly 2 decades. Passengers and cargo running through the same hub on the same network, reinforcing feeding each other. When passenger demand softens, freight carries the load. When freight is quiet, passengers fill the seats. Two revenue streams, one integrated machine, balanced on the most central piece of real estate on the continent. That's the model nobody else copied, not because it was hidden, but because it took decades of discipline and a refusal to chase the easy, glamorous routes everyone else fought over. So the model works. It built the largest, most profitable airline in Africa, which raises an uncomfortable question. If it's working this well, what on earth would force Ethiopian to bet $12.5 billion on something completely new? Here's the catch. The engine that built all of this is running out of room. Addis Ababa Bole International Airport is the beating heart of everything Ethiopian does. Every spoke feeds into it. Every long-haul connection departs from it. Every ton of cargo passes through it. And it's filling up. By some estimates, Bole is now handling somewhere in the region of 19 to 25 million passengers a year, and it's pressing hard against its ceiling. Different sources land on different numbers, but they all point the same direction. The airport is approaching the limit of what it can physically absorb, and this is the part no amount of clever scheduling can fix. Bole's constraints aren't about software or staffing, they're physical. The airport sits close to the city, hemmed in by urban development that has grown up around it. Its runway configuration, its terminal space, its apron room for parking and turning aircraft, all of it is reaching saturation. That's the trap a successful hub eventually walks into. The very thing that makes a central hub valuable, everything funneling through one point, becomes a liability the moment that point fills up. You can't grow the network faster than you can grow the airport underneath it. For an airline whose entire strategy depends on funneling more and more traffic through one place, a maxed-out hub isn't an inconvenience. It's an existential ceiling. You can buy more aircraft, you can sign more route rights, but if there's nowhere to land them and no gate to park them, the empire simply stops growing. So if the hub that built the empire is essentially full and the whole model depends on that hub getting bigger, there's only one way out. You don't fix the old airport, you build a new one. Enter Bishoftu, southeast of Addis Ababa. Ethiopian Airlines Group is leading a $12.5 billion project to build what's intended to become the largest airport in all of Africa. This isn't an expansion, it isn't another terminal bolted onto Bole. It's a greenfield mega hub built from nothing, designed specifically to give the airline the room its old home can no longer offer. Construction officially began in January 2026. The target for opening is 2030, though it's worth being clear-eyed here. This is a project on a scale very few countries have ever attempted, and mega projects this size almost never hit their first timeline cleanly. Treat 2030 as the ambition, not the guarantee. And the vision is bigger than runways and gates. Ethiopian is marketing Bishoftu as Africa's new aviation gateway, framing it not just as an airport, but as an entire airport city, with logistics parks, commercial zones, and freight facilities built right into the design. In other words, it's the same dual passenger and cargo model that won at Bole, scaled up and given the physical space to expand for decades. According to reporting by Reuters, the plan reportedly calls for 4 runways, an initial capacity of around 60 million passengers a year, expandable toward roughly 110 million over time, with the terminals designed by Zaha Hadid architects. If those figures hold, Bishoftu wouldn't just relieve the pressure on Bole, it would leapfrog Ethiopian into a different league entirely, the kind of hub that competes with the biggest connecting airports on the planet. But a number like $12.5 billion sitting against a single state-owned airline raises an obvious question. Who's actually paying for this? This is where that ownership structure comes back. Because Ethiopian sits inside the country's sovereign wealth fund, there's a built-in framework for channeling state capital into a project this size. In a way, a normal privately held airline never could. And according to reporting by CNN, the funding is coming together in layers. As of early 2026, Ethiopian itself is reportedly putting up around 30% of the project as equity, with roughly $6 billion in financing secured. For the balance, negotiations were reported with partners including the United States, China, and Italy. Some of it locked in, much of it still being assembled. So the bet is real, the ground is broken, and the money is partly in hand. Ethiopian is genuinely trying to build Africa's Dubai in the desert southeast of its capital. But here's the problem. Building Africa's Dubai means picking a fight with the actual Dubai. Ethiopian doesn't operate in a vacuum. The traffic it wants, intercontinental passengers flowing between Africa and the rest of the world, is exactly the traffic the strongest hub carriers on Earth have spent decades learning how to capture. Start with the Gulf. Emirates funnels African traffic through Dubai. Qatar Airways pulls it through Doha. Etihad routes it through Abu Dhabi. These are airlines with enormous wide-body fleets, world-class hubs, and deep pockets, and they are very good at convincing an African traveler to connect through the Gulf on the way to anywhere. Add Turkish Airlines, growing aggressively through Istanbul, and the major European hubs that have served Africa for generations, and Ethiopian is fighting on multiple fronts at once. And the threat isn't only from outside the continent. New African hubs are emerging too, and one in particular should worry Addis. Qatar Airways has reportedly built a strategic relationship with Rwanda and is involved in developing a planned hub in Kigali, Rwanda. If that develops the way it's been described, it would put a Gulf-backed connecting hub on Ethiopian's own continent, competing for the very African traffic that is Ethiopian's lifeblood. Think about what that means. Ethiopian's entire advantage was aggregating African passengers and feeding them onto long-haul flights. A rival hub inside Africa, backed by one of the richest airlines in the world, attacks that advantage at its source. So Ethiopian is making the largest infrastructure bet in its history at the exact moment the competition is closing in, from the Gulf, from Istanbul, from Europe, and now potentially from within Africa itself. Which brings us to the question this whole story has been building toward. With all of that pressure bearing down, can Ethiopian actually win? Start with what's genuinely in its favor, because it's substantial. That central continental geography hasn't gone anywhere. Addis sits in the middle of the continent, and Bishoftu doesn't change that. It amplifies it, giving the airline room to funnel far more traffic through the same unbeatable location. The integrated passenger and cargo model, the thing nobody else copied, scales directly into the new airport city. And the sovereign fund ownership means Ethiopian can think in decades, not quarters. That's patient capital, the kind that can absorb a slow start in a way a publicly traded rival never could. That's a real moat. Geography, an integrated dual hub, and an owner willing to play a long game. Put together, it's the most defensible position any African carrier has ever held. But the counterweights are just as real, and they all sit on the other side of the same bet. That 2030 opening is aspirational, and mega projects this size slip routinely, sometimes by years. A delay doesn't just push back a ribbon cutting, it means bowl stays maxed out longer, capping growth while competitors keep moving. The financing for the balance of that $12.5 billion is still being negotiated, not fully locked, and the Gulf carriers, Turkish, the Europeans, and a potential Kigali hub aren't going to wait politely while Ethiopian pours concrete for 4 years. So this is the real shape of it. The model that beat every African rival at home now has to scale into a continental gateway, on time, on budget, and against the strongest hub carriers on the planet all at once. Win, and Bishoftu makes Addis the crossroads of Africa. Stumble, and it becomes the most expensive runway on the continent. That's not a comfortable bet, but it's the only one that lets the empire keep growing. The only consistently profitable airline on a continent of bankruptcies is no longer just surviving. It's spending $12.5 billion to become the crossroads Africa never had. By 2030, one of two things will be true. Either Bishoftu makes Addis Ababa the Dubai of Africa, the place the whole continent connects through, or the Gulf carriers, Istanbul, and a rising Kigali turn it into the most expensive runway Africa has ever built. The model that beat every African rival now has to beat the world's best. If this gave you a sharper picture of how Ethiopian actually wins where everyone else fails, you should click here to subscribe and check out another video.